if I could ask Rebecca Atkinson, please, to make some remarks on the translation.
Thank you. Yes, I'm actually slightly nonplussed in a way by the kind invitation to talk here. I certainly know nothing about phenomenological psychopathology or indeed pathology of any kind at all. I am a translator by trade. I also study translation. I'm doing a doctorate at the moment. So it's only about translation that I can speak with any authority here. But I am, as I say, slightly in awe of the fact that Guilherme would consider me worthy of talking here. He's consistently being a humble partner in the process. We had long, really lengthy discussions during the process of producing the manuscript in English, and during the early months of the pandemic. So I've sort of put together a few thoughts that I have about the process, which I hope might be of some interest. But first of all, I just wanted to acknowledge that it's very interesting that anybody should consider talking about the translation of this book, because it hasn't come out as declaredly a translation, even though it is. And that's pretty common in academia. There are a lot of books and papers that are published out there that aren't declaredly translations, but actually are. And but probably the most notable aspect of the production of the book in English is the fact that it was translated using machine translation, and that's something that would have been unthinkable a couple of decades ago. Frankly, even maybe 10 or 5 years ago. The game changer in the world of machine translation has been in the last 4 years with the development of neural machine translation systems. So they use neural networks rather than statistical systems. And so Guilherme presented me with a manuscript that had been translated using DeepL. That's a system that uses a convolutional neural network. It's essentially a deep learning algorithm, hence DeepL, which learns through exposure to huge mammoth quantities of training data to assign different weights and biases to aspects of the input. So convolutional neural networks are actually developed for image recognition and classification, not for natural language processing. So it's interesting that actually the biggest developments in neural translation, machine translation, are coming through something that are coming from images, and what they do is essentially pick up more of the vicinity, words in the vicinity of a given word, both in the input and output, and manage to achieve more natural sounding translations as a result. So for academics like Guilherme, who are not native speakers of English, these advances in machine translation are extremely welcome, particularly at a time when money is in such short supply, even for core research. And I speak from Brazil, where frankly budgets are being decimated, let alone for translation. So obviously a Brazilian scholar who is able to publish in English is going to have a far larger potential readership than one who publishes only in Portuguese. And imagine if Guilherme's book could only come out in Portuguese, then its impact would be so much less. The technology isn't there yet. As it stands, a raw machine translation, especially of a text that's so semantically and syntactically dense, couldn't be used directly without doing what's called post-editing, and that's where I came in. So Guilherme sent me the manuscript at the beginning of April of last year, so it really was a lockdown project for me. And I think the initial idea was to do monolingual post-editing of the raw machine translation, but it quickly became clear that that just wasn't going to work. So essentially the first stage was just to literally go through the translation sentence by sentence against the source text in Portuguese. One of the main issues of machine translation is it often doesn't make the right call when it comes to references within the text. Just a simple example, the pronoun seu in Portuguese can mean his, her, its, their, and your. So that's just one teeny tiny example of the pitfalls that you have to be mindful of. And of course, syntactically, it was important to get away from the source syntax and to produce a text that sounded more natural in English. As far as terminology is concerned, well, the terminology of phenomenology is stabilized as far as I'm aware in English, so it was pretty much a matter of finding out how things are in English in that area. But I do believe, and the other people present in this panel will be able to say this better than I, that Guilherme's work does contain some conceptual innovations, and that meant that we did have to sit down and really decide what they meant and how they should sound in English. So just a really simple example of that was one of the spatial polarities, talking about dialectics, and there's the self pole and the other pole. Well, they didn't initially come out as self pole and other pole. Guilherme had read the German, of course, of Husserl, not of course. I think it's quite extraordinary that Guilherme read Husserl in German. And was very concerned about the word I and the meaning, whether I and self would have exactly the same meaning. But in the end, so instead of pole of the I or I pole, we did end up going to self pole. Same with the other pole of the other, pole of otherness ended up becoming other pole. So little things like that, but we're actually, there were a lot of little things like that that we just went through in quite extensive discussions, as both on paper and on Skype, which, as I say, during the early days of the pandemic were actually a welcome distraction, because it was all a bit scary back then. But I think probably my greatest merit is being completely ignorant of the subject, and hence really asking probably some pretty basic questions. And I'm sure that Guilherme thought, well, if she can understand it, then anybody can. And so that's really, I think, what I can contribute at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I don't know, Guilherme, if you had any comments in return.
I'd like to thank Rebecca. I'd like to say that to stress the idea that was a very good topic, a very good kindergarten for early pandemics, and very satisfied with the result. Thank you very much.